everyone, and welcome to the Conservatives for Ukraine Speakers Bureau panel. Today is January 2nd, 2025. Welcome to the new year. And we are happy for anyone that is joining us and watching this video. I'm going to introduce the panel to you tonight. We're going to start with Clare Lopez, who is a former career CIA operative and has served on 2 presidential campaigns as a national security advisor. Clare has traveled the globe and provides her geopolitical expertise to numerous publications and TV news appearances as well. Trevor Loudon is an author and filmmaker who has written numerous books and is a first authority on communism. Trevor's the founder of a database called KeyWiki and also the founder of this group. And you can find Trevor's work at his website at trevorloudon.com. Jeff Nyquist is an academic who has an emphasis on Russian history and has written books that you can also find on Amazon. He's been a columnist for such publications as the Epoch Times and others. Jeff's political writings often contain content regarding political sabotage operations, and you can find him at his blog at J.R. Nyquist. Thomas Cromwell is a journalist who's traveled the world and was a news editor in the Middle East for over 20 years. Thomas has a book on Amazon called Why Ukraine Must Win. It is a must read, and Thomas joins us tonight for the panel as well. Victor Rudd is an attorney with a family history from Ukraine. He's chaired the Foreign Affairs Committee with the Ukrainian American Bar Association, among other prestigious positions around Europe, and is an in-demand international public speaker. And my name's Lauren Morris. I'm a lifelong career analyst and investigator and independent journalist. I traveled to Ukraine in 2023 to document some findings and support the war effort. So tonight we're going to kind of go around and talk about what some of our highlights are from 2024 on the war in Ukraine, and maybe expand out on that a little bit. And let's start with Trevor. Trevor, what were your highlights for 2024 on Ukraine?
Well, I would say the invasion of Kursk and Biden's belated decision to allow the Ukrainians to at least strike some targets inside Russian territory. And I would also say that NATO hanging together, the bringing of Sweden and Finland into NATO, I thought was great. And I think the debate going on inside the Republican Party between the pro-Russian factions and the pro-Ukraine factions, the pro-freedom factions, I think I'm pleased that a lot of them are standing up to the Russian propaganda, that the Russian propagandists aren't getting all their way. And the signs that do come from the Trump administration of a much tougher line against Russia when Trump becomes president, of extensive sanctions against Russia, or real effective sanctions, especially in technology and against China, North Korea, etc. Those are the highlights for me. And the fact that the Ukrainian people are just still hanging on with so much grit and so much courage. Zelensky made a great New Year's speech to the people just a day ago, and I'm encouraged, but I think the war now is going to move into really what is Trump going to do, and how's that going to impact Europe, and how's that going to impact NATO? I think that's where we have to look going forward.
Does anyone have any comments for Trevor on Trevor's remarks? All right, Clare, you want to tell us what's on your mind tonight?
Well, just very briefly, I guess I would echo some of Trevor's comments about the highlights of this past year. We're heading into the third winter for the Ukrainian people in this war. And we're seeing that their electric grid, their energy supplies, and so forth are being hit again in absolute war crime attacks to try and freeze them out. Really, is what they're doing. The very belated, as you mentioned, Trevor mentioned, the very belated provision of some of the much needed supplies, weaponry in particular, to Ukraine comes belatedly at the very end of the Biden administration. What they need probably more than anything is air defense. I'll tell you what has caught my attention with this war really over the last 3 years, practically now almost, is the emergence of new technologies in warfare, and I'm thinking in particular of drone warfare. That probably is the first war battlefront in this, ever really, that we're seeing the emergence and the dominance of unmanned systems, in particular drone warfare. But I would just be looking forward, as Trevor said, to President Trump coming back into office on January the 20th, in less than 3 weeks now, and know that he has already spoken to both President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine and also Vladimir Putin of Russia. Don't know exactly what he said to each, but know that he has made these promises of settling this war. I think he said like overnight. I'm not quite sure how that's going to happen. I only can hope that he does not mean to place demands on the Ukrainians that they essentially capitulate their sovereignty or their sovereign territory in return for a cessation of hostilities.
Agree. Those are great comments. I have many things to say in that regard as well, but Jeff, what say you tonight? What's on your mind?
Well, I think the most important thing of this year is Ukraine has gone through the third year of the war undefeated, in the sense that Russia has not had a strategic victory. And despite the fact the U.S. in the first part of the year cut off its supplies to Ukraine, despite the fall of the Law and Justice Party in Poland, definitely a blow, I think, to Kiev. And despite the North Koreans and increased help from China getting involved in the war, this is extraordinary. And I think the fact that Trump picked General Kellogg to be his envoy for negotiating is a signal. Also, the fact that Trump wore the Ukrainian national colors. He wore a yellow tie with a blue blazer to meet foreign leaders. And I think that people in Russia gulped hard when they saw that, because Trump loves playing those psychological games. I think the thing is that Poland survived a very bad year, a very critical year. And it's this is and General Kellogg gave an interview in with a Voice of America in April, I think it was, in which the second question of the interviewer was, oh, Biden has built up Ukraine so much, and he cut him off and he said, no, he hasn't. These are all tokens, 31 tanks, a handful of fighter planes. It's token support for Ukraine. He really blasted the guy. It was interesting to see that this was the guy that Trump picked, a guy who thinks that the Biden administration has not really supported Ukraine. And I find that really interesting. And of course, I think that as things continue to develop in Europe, there's going to be a shift in Europe as well. So that's just the way I see this coming year, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, Trevor, you've been saying for 3 years now that Biden's no friend of Ukraine. I've heard you say that numerous times. Do you still feel that way?
Look, absolutely. He's done the barest minimum he could at all stages. He has promised a lot but delivered very little. Held back aid at critical times and invited the actual attack by saying to Putin, a limited attack on Ukraine would not warrant an American response. If that wasn't a green light, I don't know what was. Biden has done nothing to help Ukraine win, just enough so they won't obviously lose. So I can't think it's going to get any worse under Trump, and I have hopes it's going to get a lot better very quickly.
Yeah, it's going to be something to watch, that's for sure. So what say you tonight, Mr. Cromwell? What's on your mind?
Well, I agree with what's been said. Sort of standing back from the war, it is absolutely stunning that Russia has made no significant breakthroughs since the first days of the war, really. They've been pushed back, and this year they made incremental advances. But if you think about how to win a war, it's not by making, these small advances over a whole year. It's by making major breakthroughs and making strategic steps towards your objective. So I think it's been a very good year for Ukraine. I think Kursk was a huge success. Thinking about Russia as supposedly the second largest military power in the world, it can't even get its neighbor out of its neighborhood. It's embarrassing, and having to resort to North Korean soldiers, and how poorly they perform, I think demonstrates, frankly, the crisis state that Russia's in. There's sort of I think this marks a crossing point where Russia's military capabilities are going down and down and down. And I've seen a lot of projections that in this year, they will be seriously undersupplied on the front line. Meanwhile, Ukraine is going in the opposite direction through developing drones, as Claire mentioned, but also their whole defense industry has expanded tremendously this year. They've got a lot of joint manufacturing agreements with companies like Rheinmetall, the big producer in Germany. They seem to be innovating all the time, as has been mentioned. And with the restrictions being removed step by step from almost all weapon systems, and the addition of the F-16s, they actually have a real chance, at least within limited regions, to have air superiority, which will change the whole balance on the battlefield, I believe. So I think with Russia going down, its economy going down, the ruble falling, the huge labor shortages, including in the military-industrial complex, that I think the balance is moving in Ukraine's favor. And as long as Trump doesn't in some way undermine or undercut the Ukrainians, I think this year will be a very successful year for them. They'll actually make advances.
Well, that's very optimistic. Are you feeling optimistic about next year, Victor? And what were the highlights for you in 2024?
Well, to be brutally honest, I'm not. And let me change geographies a little bit, then I'm going to expand on it and try to explain where I'm coming from. A lot of us will remember when we de-recognized Taiwan, extended diplomatic recognition to China, and the ecstasy with which we thought we're going to turn communist China into good bourgeois capitalists. And it looks like we screwed up. That's nothing new. There was no precedent in history whatsoever for us to think we would be successful and get China to join the West and reduce its potential threat. And indeed, history was full of precedents vis-a-vis our dealings with the Soviet Union that China, would go in the opposite direction. And my point is this, that we have regularly, almost like a metronome, with with both administrations for many, many years, for generations. We have all often been at points, at crossroads, where we were absolutely convinced that what we were doing, how we were assessing the issue, the problem, and what we should do about it was absolutely the right thing to do. And it turned out that more often than not, we were doing the exact opposite of what should have been done. And what I see, having been confirmed now for almost 3 years, is actually another example of this in several manifestations. One being, of course, the self-paralysis that the Biden administration had about aid to Ukraine and the timing of the weapons and all this and everything else. But there's something much more fundamental. And that is that almost from the get-go, with some variations, of course, but generally speaking, everybody has been pushing not only the United States, but of course the Europeans. Everybody is hammering on the victim and not on the aggressor. We do not yet have, and I'm afraid, if I look at past history as precedent, I have to say, I don't think we're going to get to the point of having as a goal, as a purpose, pushing Russia back to where it was before and to achieving the status quo ante of 2014 and having any reparations or claims or anything else that Russia has to be accountable for its aggression. And when you look at the fact of where we are as a nation, still the largest and the most powerful country in the world, and who we have aligned against us, in this case, Russia, basically held together with duct tape and increasingly more, I fear what China and others have been extrapolating out of that. Gulliver being progressively tied down from foot to toe, and Latin America hasn't exploded yet, and it will. A lot of the talk that we read and hear about the last year in Ukraine, I don't disagree with it. I don't disagree much with what we're saying about this year, but in the main, unless we have a radical redo of our head, where our head is, I'm afraid things aren't going to get any better. And that requires a full court press on what Biden should have done a long time ago, and that is to lay it out for the American electorate. What's at stake here and what's at issue? We are spiraling down a strategic sinkhole. The things that we chalk up as a success, sometimes it's not of our own doing, and it's happenstance. We cannot look how we misjudged. Biden misjudged Ukraine. It wasn't just the small incursion, Trevor, that you mentioned. I think I mentioned this before. His first national global security assessment in his first year in office in the spring didn't mention Ukraine once. Not a single time, despite the fact that, as we know, back in 2014, we acquiesced to the annexation of the Crimean Peninsula. I mean, that is as gross a kick in the face for the so-called world order that you can have. What does anybody extrapolate out of that? So without belaboring the point, if we look at it as I've tried to, on my soapbox, try to elucidate in various writings and talks that I've had, our deterrence credibility, our reputation, our principles, that is our strength. You can have as many missiles as you want. I don't care how many rifles you count. If we don't have that, we're going to lose everything else. And I don't see a big turnaround on that point coming around, except if fortuitously, yeah, Trump does something that I don't think he will do. I don't think that Putin is going to, quote unquote, negotiate with Kellogg. I think Putin wants Trump alone in the room, and I think Trump is going to cave. If he, on the other hand, does what he says he will do, which is, well, the hell with Putin, I'm going to load Ukraine up to the teeth. Fine and well, but is that based on his understanding what our purpose and goal has to be as a nation and what our interests are globally and how that's going to what the ramifications going to be for us globally? I don't think he sees that. He may, but right now, very, very honestly, right now, I am not optimistic. I don't see that turnaround coming.
So basically, you're saying you don't think that Trump is going to kick Putin while he's down, no matter how much Zelensky wants him to do that. What say you, Claire? Were you going to jump in there?
Yeah, real quick, a couple of things that folks have said reminded me of a couple points that maybe we could make here tonight. One of them is looking ahead to the Trump administration taking office now in what is it, 18 days or something. And we know that there are policies and events that are taking place elsewhere than the actual theater of war that are going to have an impact on that theater of war in this coming year. And here domestically in the United States, as Trump has promised to drill, baby, drill, to take all of the restraints off of our development of our energy sector that the Biden administration has placed on that sector over these last 4 years. When Trump opens that back up again, not only is that going to help us here in the United States with everything from production costs of manufacturing to delivery to the gas pump, but it's also going to lower the price of oil worldwide, even if some of our Middle Eastern producers do not themselves increase production. The increase of the United States production is going to have worldwide repercussions, and it will have an impact on Russia in terms of its own ability to raise money to sell oil. It doesn't have a whole lot else to sell. And those prices will go down, and that will have an impact on the Russian economy, which, as others have mentioned, is already in dire straits. The one other place that I would look at, and I've spent probably more time looking at the Middle East lately than I have Russia, Ukraine, but with what has been happening in the Middle East, in particular, the Israelis basically decimating, taking down the proxy jihadi insurance policies, if you want to call them that, of the Iranian regime. Hamas down, PIJ, Palestinian Islamic Jihad. Hezbollah, very much diminished, not defeated, not gone, diminished. And then, of course, Bashar al-Assad out of power in Damascus basically leaves Iran naked in terms of those sort of, as I call them, insurance policy proxies. But the other thing that has been happening is that Israel has taken down all of Iran's aerial defense capability. Back in April, they took out one of the S-300 aerial defense systems. And then at the end of this October past, Israel took down the remaining 3 S-300 aerial defense battery systems that were located, those in and around Tehran. This leaves the Iranian regime essentially naked of air defense, naked of proxies that were to have been its insurance policy. This, in turn, has had an impact, especially in what's going on in Syria with Russia. There are connections. And the connections have to do, in particular, with those Russian bases that they have had, the naval base in Tartus on the Mediterranean there, and then the air defense or air base north of Tartus in Latakia, also close to the Mediterranean. It is not at all certain that Russia is going to be able to maintain those bases. They've already evacuated their naval assets, and the new rulers, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, and this al-Golani guy, there's no guarantee they're going to allow the Russians, which were there not just to defend Bashar al-Assad's regime in Damascus, but for their own foothold there, in the Mediterranean, but to allow them to remain. That has an impact and will have an impact, especially going forward, if they are not permitted, they're not allowed to keep those bases, to keep those footholds. That will make a big difference. But also, with regard to Iran, last comment there, the Russians cannot, will not, are not going to replace those S-300 systems or other air defense systems of Iran. They cannot do it. They're not able to do it. And that shows where Russia's, capabilities lie, as well as Iran's too. So all of these things in other places here in the Middle East are having already an impact and effect on Russia's ability to continue prosecuting that war.
What's our goal?
I'm sorry, what?
What's our goal? And I'm not directing my question
Our goal.
just to you, but to everybody. What purpose? What are we trying to achieve with, what's going on with Russia's war against Ukraine? What are we trying to achieve?
Well, from the micro to the macro, micro is to help Ukraine to defend its own sovereign territory, to hold the line in Europe against Russian aggression, to stop the Putin dream of reestablishing the Russian Empire, to defend NATO before the battlefront comes actually to the borders of NATO. But scoping out more macro, I think our interest as the United States of America, MAGA first, is that we are part of and claim to value the sovereign nation state system of the world that is totally imperfect, but that is the system, that we've had, goes back to the Treaty of Westphalia, of course.
Yeah.
And defending that sovereign nation system with ideally defensible borders is something that we're all part of, unless we wish to just let it all go and, let loose the dogs of war and chaos follows.
So de minimis, it has to be recouping, as I said before, the status quo ante of 2014.
Oh, we found some key. Okay. Thank you.
I mean, we are afforded. I'm in touch with Ukraine almost on a daily basis with
I thought we could advance, I don't mind.
privates in the trenches to different levels of government. And they, as other nations who've had to deal with Russia, cannot understand, cannot fathom why now, which is essentially the second time in recent history that the West, I'll just say the West, has been afforded an opportunity to finally lead to the decolonization and de-imperialization of Russia for our own benefit. Why that isn't even on the drawing board.
Because people don't know their history.
Okay, there you go.
So Trump, we've seen in the last year in Trump's rallies, he gets really angry at people who are, quote, stupid and incompetent. So it's my hope that he sees the blunder after blunder after blunder that has been happening in the Russian military under Putin, and contrast that with any kind of an off-ramp he's going to want to give Putin, or he could offer Putin to give him an off-ramp and have him save face. And so there's that. I mean, what's he gonna do? And then thinking in terms of how wars are won and fought, which I think is something that Trump has had to really ramp up on really quickly and learn. You know, what's going to be the reality of getting out of this? The things for me that were the big highlights of 2024 were just the blunders of the Russian army and how they just seemed to not only suffer humiliations under the brilliant Ukrainians for the strikes on their territory and the other humiliations that they were beating them on the battlefield, but how the Russians shot themselves in the foot with let's say, the spill in the Black Sea that dumped over 9,200 tons of heavy fuel oil that they don't seem to be able to clean up. Or how about the 420,000 casualties that they suffered this year alone? In November it was an average of 1,500 soldiers every day. The strikes on their strategic facilities, their purges on the battlefield of their commanding officers, the loss of the strategic assets, and then just the counter propaganda war that I think Zelensky has been so brilliant at, to just humiliate the Russians as the murdering people that they are all over social media. I know it's had an impact because remember when Lavrov came out after all that they did in Bucha, all of the atrocities that they did in Bucha. And Lavrov comes out saying, well, we weren't even there. That was Zelensky. Zelensky's bombing his own people. He's doing all this stuff to their own people. And, I really think they never saw the backlash coming.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm not gonna well, please go ahead. I don't want to monopolize, but I'll make eventually an observation on this. And Claire, I don't dispute or disagree with anything that you said about the developments in the Middle East and everything else, and that's going to affect us. But I still don't think we're getting to the core of the issue. But I'm going to shut up for a minute.
Well, I think, what we should be raising as an issue is that the defeat of Russia will be great for European and American security and will enable us to deal with China and Iran much more effectively. I think that Russia is very, very vulnerable right now. I think Trump realizes this, but the public must realize this too. And this is a role for groups like us, and Thomas and I are working on an initiative right now, a letter along these lines, that America should carry on the goal of Ronald Reagan of basically destroying the evil empire. The new iteration of the evil empire. And the people of Europe will do this with our help. The people of Ukraine will do it. The people of Asia will do that to the CCP. And the people of Iran would rise up in a heartbeat against the mullahs if they had a chance of winning, if they had a little bit of support, at least moral support from the West. So I think our strategic goal must be to defeat Putin, which will basically end the regime of the mullahs and put the CCP and Rocket Boy under extreme pressure from their own people.
I'd like to comment on what Victor said as well. The larger strategic look, Ukraine survived. It was amazing for this year. It gives a new possibility for the future. The appointment of General Kellogg is more encouraging than if, somebody who hated Ukraine was appointed. But I take Victor's point. Look, I had the occasion in September to sit down with the recently retiring generals of NORAD, Canadian and American, And they talked about how we are so far behind Russia strategically, and that by the time we even build the infrastructure to catch up with Russia, China will have the same kind of attack infrastructure as Russia in terms of um, hypersonic missiles and long-range cruise missiles with nuclear warheads, things that can't be shot down. And they were very, I had dinner with them. They were very serious, very sharp about what they knew about the strategic balance. And General Peltier, who was the deputy head of NATO, of NORAD, who was a Canadian general, I said, well, if China and Russia are together, they could defeat us now strategically. And he said, why would they go now when in 4 or 5 years they're going to be stronger? And I said, you mean no matter what Trump does, they're going to be stronger? He said, yes, because we have to. And then there was a Canadian admiral there explaining how we're not serious. And I had a chance to meet Greg Autry, who'd written a book, Red Moon Rising, about China's push for the moon. And I was shocked because he had the statistics in today's dollars, what the United States spent to build the Minuteman III rockets that are now rotting in the Midwest, that probably half of them don't work. We spent to build our submarine and land-based forces and bombers, we spent the equivalent of, in today's money, of over $7 trillion. What we have committed now to rebuild that, because it's all rotted out, we have 1.2 trillion committed to it. We are not serious, like Victor says, we're not serious about winning in Ukraine because it's a symptom of a larger disease that we don't see. We have enemies, and we're not serious about this larger strategic issue.
Our mentality, our psychology, our DNA is basically to manage and to administer things. We approach international affairs the way we approach domestic affairs, management. We are not an active player to change things. We have very, very rarely done that. Containment was a disaster. It was a condemnation to passivity with the response, let history take its course and eventually things will work out. Heaven forbid we do anything active to catalyze something in our favor. And that is why Reagan was the apostate from what up to that point in time was American so-called policy. That policy was once defined as the bureaucratic verbalization of a policy of drift. And I'm glad to hear, Trevor, what I hear that you and Thomas are working on, because that change of mindset, if that doesn't occur, we're not going anywhere. It's difficult enough for us to view countries and regimes and tyrannies as really evil, bad things who are out to destroy us. Right? If we extend diplomatic recognition to the Soviet Union on November 16th, 1933, to the regime that is sworn to our own very own destruction, and we celebrate that, what else can we say? So again, I look at this, for the purposes of today's discussion, I'm approaching this as not so much, what do we have on the board? Who's in the Coliseum? Who's got the pitchfork? Who's got this sword? And so on and so forth. I'm looking at it from a standpoint of unfortunately, us having lost opportunity time and time and time again, which is why I use the example of China, to really use our weight to make a change that is going to be long lasting. Russia has nothing, China has nothing. At least China can make a frying pan. Russia can't, right? But we have the economy, we have the values, we have the principles, we have what everybody wants, we have the freedom. And yet, time and time again, we're screwing up. We haven't been able to deter, to prevent, or to reverse. That needs a real, bitterly honest and brutal self-assessment and self-appraisal on the part of Trump and his administration. And I agree, Yeah, you're right, Jeff. Better Kellogg than the continuation of infants such as Sullivan and others. Um, but it's going to take a lot more than that. So I don't, the caution I have is even if Trump comes out and says, okay, we're going to arm Ukraine, so on and so forth, again, for how long? With what purpose in mind? Ukraine is losing blood and human viscera at a geometric rate.
Mhm.
The blood in the trenches is massive.
It is, and I remember, I don't know, Trevor, you might remember, but I said to you, it looks really grim. And I think it was probably in August. And it was horrible, horrible in Ukraine. And Victor, you and I talked the other day about the what the Russians are doing to the Ukrainians when they catch them, and it's just almost unspeakable, and it's unthinkable. And the American public needs to know. Certainly, our new president needs to know about how bad the atrocities are and the traumas that the Ukrainian people are suffering. I guess my question um, would be what kind of, and Jeff, this might be one for you, what kind of sabotage operations do you think are coming in 2025 from Russia?
Oh, that's a good question. I've been following what Mr. Dugan has been doing. It's very interesting. I did not realize until my more recent research the extent of his organization, the fact that he has an office in China, the fact that he travels all over the world, that he's got lieutenants in countries like Brazil and Israel and of course Iran and India and Iran and Pakistan and so on. This is a movement involving thousands of people. They're literally using the internet. They're picking people who are non-English speakers, and they are filling them with this Eurasianism, which they take perennial. You're a Hindu. Look, Americans are Christians. They hate you, so you've got to join the Eurasianist movement. Oh, look, you're a Muslim. The Americans hate you. You got to join this movement, and so on. And it's crazy how much I am shocked at how much progress they've made while we weren't looking. On a grassroots level, the infiltration of Catholic churches I talked to a Romanian researcher in Romania, in Croatia, in Italy, she said, local parishes are turning to the Dugan type way of talking where Russia is going to be the savior. While the Ukrainians are fighting, the Russian strategy is to undermine Ukraine, not just with the left, but with the right, but in every way they can. And to undermine America's position, what Victor said about the Cold War was exactly right. We didn't have a strategy that worked. It was a disaster. Containment broke down. We saw it in Africa. We saw it in Asia with the Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. We saw it in the Americas. I mean, look at the Americas today. Yeah. Yeah. And so we never got it right. I mean, the idea that we won the Cold War, that is a kind of conceit that you should take a dirty sock and stuff it in the mouth of anyone who has that conceit, because they got to grow up. And there's such an immaturity level in our politicians and our so-called pundits and strategic thinkers that goes exactly to what Victor is saying, is that we are so simple that, as Victor said, Putin just wants to get Trump alone in a room and he could say, hey, look, buddy, I know you're worried about China. I'll ally with you against China, wink, wink, if you just let me take Ukraine. I'm making that up on the fly, but that's the kind of thing that we have fallen for in the past. As Victor outlined with the Taiwan-China thing, we believe fantastic boondoggles, based our policies for decades on them, been swindled and then come up short strategically. I mean, we just built the best enemy money can buy in China. So they can do it again to us. They can flip us again. Oh, play the Russia card. I had Steve Bannon tell me that. We're going to play the Russia card. We're going to end this war in Ukraine and play the Russia card. I was on his show. He said this. So look, the idiots, the children that are in playing politics, who have no idea what this this whole thing is about, they seem to have more say than sensible people.
Thomas, I see you nodding. What are you thinking?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the core of the problem that Victor's so concerned about. All of us are really. Um, the people around Trump, many of them are real duds, intellectually duds. They've obviously been co-opted by Russia. Um, and they act as if they're the most brilliant people on earth. But the troubling thing in a way is Trump himself. The only sort of saving grace that I see vis-a-vis Ukraine is that in America, at least, he obviously has come to realize he's got to be more radical than he was first time around. The trouble is he doesn't seem to have a picture of the world that is cohesive or identifiable or moral or principled. And this is why containment is so appealing, I think. It doesn't challenge you to take a moral stand and to be willing to sacrifice. And I think, Victor, like you're talking about Reagan, he would say things like, "There's a point beyond which we will not sacrifice." In other words, we will not give up our freedom. That we are willing to pay a price, not only for ourselves but for the world. And it's this type of resolve that is so lacking in the international arena because America must lead. There's no alternative. No one has the power, economic or military, to take that leadership position. But where is the vision? Where is the ideology that says we don't want to live with dictators and totalitarians and oppressive regimes at all? They have no place in a civilized world.
So
I
Trevor,
think that's what's lacking.
how do you teach President Trump that he needs to play a long game?
Well, I think President Trump has to see his place in history. I think there's a providential nature to this. The American Republic was founded by some very special people that had a very special vision. And that created a country of prosperity and freedom that did a lot of good in the world. And it produced a Reagan who had a vision, at least a vision of standing up to the evil empire, probably not as successfully as some people think he did. But this tradition goes back. I think Trump, if he can see his role is not just to make America great again, but to use the power of America with allies around the world to basically starve out the CCP, to starve out Putin, to starve out Rocket Boy, to see that he could actually be even greater, that he could use America's power to end the regime in Russia, not just to contain it, not to make friends with it, but to end the regime in Russia, the regime in Iran, the regime in China. That would alter the whole world balance of power. And he would go down in history as the greatest president in world history. So I think we have to present that vision that it's not just make America great again, it is use America's power to make the world a greater place so that we could hand something on to our children that is much safer and much more prosperous than we have today. And this is the vision. I can see no other vision that's worth pursuing. Why just continue with containment? Because we are going to lose eventually. We're going to lose everything with containment. So we have to win this. And I think we have to present this vision that if Trump fulfills this vision, that he will, he will go down as a great president, and I think this is within our grasp because, the Iranians are hanging on by their fingernails. The Russian regime is hanging on by its fingernails, and so is the CCP. But so is America right now. But if we present a vision, our vision will be better than their vision. And if we can get buy-in from the Israelis and the Argentinians and the other free nations of the world and the European nations, I think there's a real chance here, God willing. And I think this will take some divine help, that with this strategic vision, we can not do what we've done in the past of snatching defeat from the jaws of victory, but actually have a real chance to push back the evil empire in ways we haven't seen before. I think this is a possibility.
It's definitely possible. It's just a matter of will and vision, determination.
Well,
Got to
look,
have the vision before you have the will. Well, you got to have the vision and the
You
will.
need
Yes.
both. Yeah.
it took us longer to finally launch containment as our purpose, if you want to call it that, than our involvement in World War II. It took us that long to wake up to all the signs that were even in place vis-a-vis the Soviet Union even before World War II. And the idea of us winning the Cold War, I don't know whether Thomas, this was you or somebody else, no, if we won it, it wasn't because of, but in spite of containment. I think that, Jeff, you mentioned Dugin. I'm jumping around a little bit, but I just wanted to pick up on a couple of points. Dugin was crystal clear long before even 1997 when he wrote Foundations of Geopolitics. What were we doing in 1997? Clinton was busy lobbying the G7 to admit Russia and make it the G8. We had already shuffled Russia into the UN Security Council seat of the Soviet Union, kicking UN admission rules out the window. We did it unlawfully. There was never any vote for by the United Nations to admit Russia. We bulldozed that in. And that kind of naivete, the hope. I mean, it's like Obama's book, The Audacity of Hope. Hope is never a strategy, but we did these utterly stupid, unfounded things which are repetitive. We do them in different contexts and it's over and over again. We have, again, last point, really more to what Trevor, you and Thomas apparently are working on. There was recently published a superb booklet called Decolonizing Russia 101, a handbook by a Ukrainian journalist, translated into English. And he went into tremendous detail talking about the history of Russian colonialism, how it plays out or should play out in Asia and Africa. And he was banned from LinkedIn. It shows you the degree of Russian infiltration, apropos what Jeff was talking about, into our society, into our cerebral cortex. We are in 10 times worse domestically than we ever were during the Cold War years, precisely because Putin managed to cross the Potomac. So it's a tough road to hoe. And again, Biden's one of his biggest felonies was he didn't go straight up and explain things to the American people. And when he had his opening statement at the State of the Union address about Ukraine was his first topic, that's like the bolt out of the blue. Who knows anything about Ukraine other than the noises and so on and so forth? There was never any address from the White House to the American public about what we're faced with and how we propose to address it. So all of these things are necessary. If Trump can get, address the people, I think that's critical, because if he's going to take a hard stance on Putin, that's going to be a reversal against the flow of a lot of people that supported him, precisely because he was not pro-Ukrainian, right? So if he's going to flip, he better damn well make that message clear and get it accepted. So we're dealing with
Well,
things on the
I would say to that, Victor, the reason we've made these strategic mistakes for so long is not because we're dumb. is because we were penetrated at the highest levels by Soviet agents since the 1920s.
Oh yeah,
You
no,
know,
no.
at the highest levels, from
Oh, believe me.
Colby and the FDR. And I think this administration now has definitely got a lot of Russian penetration,
Mm-hmm.
but it also has the potential to fly in the face of what has gone before, to disregard the State Department, to get us out of the World Health Organization, to actually stand against the CCP, and to stand against Putin. Whether that will happen or not is another factor. But I think this is an administration that has enough people in it that and recognize the situation is so damn desperate now that we cannot follow the old road. So I think this we are going to see either the West destroyed in the next 4 years, or the West reborn. I don't think we're going to see a continuation of what's happened before.
No, we're not going to see that. It's going to go one way or the other. Right now, I'm not positive about an upward trajectory, as I said, but I'll drop a couple of points on you. The OSS was the precursor to the CIA, and Bill Donovan's secretary was a Soviet agent. And the Soviets knew what the OSS was doing and was planning with the CIA. And as a matter of fact, the CIA's organization, right in the middle of it, was guess who? Kim Philby.
Yeah. Who was Donovan's secretary, by the way?
Name slips. Duncan.
Duncan.
I forget the name.
Yeah, I know who you mean. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you had the CIA director, General Walter Bedell Smith, was sidelined. This came out much later, decades later, sidelined because he was suspected by the FBI of being a Soviet agent. So the head of the CIA in 1953 in January was sidelined by Eisenhower, who kind of promised him a better job to get him out. And of course, that's how Alan Dulles got in.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's a tremendous scandal, which they've covered up for half a century.
We really
And we could, Colby, the head of the CIA, if that guy wasn't a Soviet agent, I'm a monkey's uncle. He has got everything around him just stunk of Soviet influence.
we have to we really have to pay attention to nations who've dealt with all of this, who've dealt with the subversion of society, the disintegration of the political systems and the like by Moscow. They've lived through it, they know it, they could smell it a mile away. But Western political establishments are arrogant as hell, and it's a killer getting heard. It really is. It's unfortunate because there's a wealth of experience there. The whole nuclear paralysis that Putin was able to wield over Biden. I mean, from the very first days, I and others were saying, "Listen, that's the yeah. Is it a threat? Is it a possibility? Of course it is. But the greater possibility is that nuclear blackmail is going to work, and then what are you going to do with North Korea, Iran, and China? Along those lines. So, in any event, it's been a good discussion.
It's been a great discussion. I think this would be a good place to end. Does anybody have any last thoughts before we close out?
I don't have any particular thoughts, but I'll send to everybody if you're interested. I don't know if I've done it before. If I did, then stop me. I'll send the paper, the critique of containment that did I send this to you guys? That I sent to Richard Allen, Reagan's first national security advisor, about the problems with containment and what should be done.
You've sent around some of your articles, but I don't know about a white paper or anything
I got
like
a very
that.
nice I got a very nice response from Mr. Allen. He's I don't think he would mind. I mean, there isn't anything that's super secret about his response. I'll send that along as well.
Is he still alive?
I don't know. He gave the commencement address for the Institute of World Politics 2 years ago. He was already quite elderly.
Right.
kind of frail. I mean, his wits were still about him. He was still razor sharp.
Hmm.
But if he's passed, honestly, I wouldn't be surprised because he was quite physically quite. Trevor, that sounds like your granddaughter.
I'm sorry, I didn't realize people could hear that. Yes, yes.
Oh, but that's a great sound. I've got two grandchildren myself, so
Yeah, no, she's
your
just come
advisor,
back inside from a
your
walk.
advisor, she's the co-author on this work you're going to have with Thomas.
Yeah, well, she's
Editor.
former president of Babies for Trump.
Oh, that's awesome. Babies for Trump.
Prenatal.
That's so great.
Yeah, yeah, she's a beautiful little child.
Oh,
But that's who we fight for, isn't it? That's who you know, we've all had great lives and living in the West, and we've got to pass that on. We have to do that.
Yeah. Well, only with God's help.
so I have to say that I think this is the first time, we've seen a lot of things ramp up over the years in terms of bad actors and enemies in the US, but I think this is the first time I've heard anyone say, like you, Victor and Trevor said, this is it. It's going to go one way or it's going to go the other. And, we can't just keep, kicking this rock down the road. So that's going to make 2025 very interesting because I know that Europe and Ukraine are still preparing for the war to never end or to not end for several more years.
Well, I think they're prepared for escalation. That's what they're prepared for.
Mhm.
It's going to
And
last. It's going to last. Even if Putin is gone, it's going to last as long as the so-called Russian faux federation exists in its current form. I'm all for Russia recovering or becoming coextensive with its historic territories, which would be about a 300-kilometer radius around Moscow.
yeah, yes, I think we have to aim for a regime change in Moscow and a breakup of the Russian Empire. We have to put that on the agenda.
Yeah.
Do you agree, Thomas?
Um,
Yeah, to properly stand up to Ukraine, we need strategic strength and strategic, at least parity with Russia and China, so that we don't say, oh, we're so scared of nuclear war, we can't support Ukraine. We have to sell them down the river. This is what I've heard people say it. It sounds awful, but I've actually heard them say this. So why not be strong? We need to do that.
Well, Ukraine's strategic strikes in the last year has been the way that they have talked about equalizing that parity because they certainly haven't had the money to be have parity economically. So they had to be creative and kind of do a workaround. And I'm just wondering what kind of tricks they have up their sleeve that we haven't seen yet because they continue to be innovative, which is one of their strong points in this war, clearly.
Russia is, by some reports, headed for a kind of breakdown. The speed of the rail traffic, the condition of the rail tracks, because of the way they're coping with the war, they're using up resources that would normally be maintaining tracks. So there's all kinds of things, logistical things about Russia that are quite bad, as someone mentioned earlier.
Mhm.
So we should be in a position to win. We should be in a position to keep Russia and China from being a threat. But we just, as Victor says, we don't have the right mentality to do that.
Look where we were in 91 and where we're at today.
Yeah.
That has to be reversed.
Yeah.
But what about all the blunders that Russia has done? I mean, all of the men that they've lost in this war and this oil spill thing. This oil spill thing is bad. It looks bad across for the rest of the world. I mean, does none of that matter in terms of, how they look to the rest of the world or how the world is going to see them? I mean, how many more atrocities can they continue to commit?
Well, you're
I think it matters, but we have to capitalize on it. We have to
Mhm.
to use it and not give them a free pass, not let them
It's
off
not
the
on the
hook.
TV screen, all right? People don't see it. You see it, we all see it and know it, and
Mhm.
it horrifies us. But you go outside, you talk with somebody on the street, he's waiting for, Monday Night Football.
Right.
The educational process in and of itself is Herculean.
Do you have any projections for 2025, Thomas?
And not beyond what we've discussed, really. As I mentioned, I do think Ukraine is on the ascendancy, as though not everything looks like that. As long as we don't cut the legs out from underneath them, by some stupid compromise with Putin.
Right.